Hi, my name is Bridget. I will be doing a book review on for an environmental science class under Professor Robert Lovely. The book that I will be reviewing today is American Environmentalism, Readings in Conservation History by Roderick Frazier Nash. This is the third edition of the book. So Roderick Frazier Nash, he was born in 1939. He had a Bachelor of Arts from Harvard, and he got his PhD here in Madison at UW, the UW campus in 1965. He worked in the history department at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and yeah, after he worked in the history department there, but when there was an oil spill in 1969, that caused him and some other colleagues to band together to create an environmental studies program at their school in 1970. So that was kind of the start of his career path towards environmentalism versus just straight history. So the book that I'm reviewing today, this is the third edition. The first one came out in 1968. Then they revised it. Second edition came out in 1976, and then this third one, 1990. So it's a little dated, but not as dated as it originally was. So the main objectives of Roderick Nash's work was to inform the reader of the history of environmentalism. This includes the people that helped make the movement happen, mistakes that were made by the American people and why, how those mistakes were corrected or brought to light, the struggle that it took to get there, because people didn't used to care about the environment. They thought it was just endless. But it's just the whole history of conservation kind of coming about in our country. So Roderick Nash successfully accomplished this. The book was very informative and covers basically the whole history of conservation and environmentalism of the United States after Europeans arrived. There's a lot of stuff in here that I never really learned about in school, have never read in a textbook before, and a lot of things that really just never crossed my mind. So what worked with his book? I think the way that Nash organized this book, he did a good job. It's very well put together. So the thing about this book is most of it is not written by him. There are very few parts in here that are like actually his words. It's almost every chapter is taken from a passage, journal, speech, or some other form of written information from conservationists throughout American history. So not everything is in order by the year either. It skips around a lot. For example, the first chapter is a passage by Black Elk, a Sioux member, that was written in 1931. And then the next two chapters were written by men in the 1970s and 80s. And then the chapters following those jump all the way back to the 1800s. But despite the order of jumping around by decades, the book is strung together in a way that makes sense as far as category goes. It flowed really well. It was easy to follow along. I was never lost or confused as to why he jumped around when he did the way he did. The thing that I think didn't work so well with this book, the one big complaint that I have is that a lot of the chapters, especially in the first half of the book, were written by men in the 1800s. For me, someone who obviously grew up in present times, it can be hard to follow along with these chapters or even retain the information from them because they're written in such a different dialect. It's like when you're in high school and you're going over the Shakespeare unit, and you have to read the footnote. They talk in such a different way back then that you have to read the footnotes at the bottom of the script just to, follow along, just so you really kind of know what's going on. And, the difference between today's speech and that of the 1800s, it's not quite as dramatic as, now versus Shakespeare, but there's still differences there, and it makes those sections just very dry and kind of hard to follow along. So I think if Nash had rewritten those chapters himself, with quotes and credit to the original writers when he revised this edition of the book in 1990, I think it would have been a lot easier to take in. So this book is split up into 5 parts, each containing a number of chapters related to that head subject. So in order, we have part 1, which was titled The Conservation Impulse, Beginnings. This section went over some of the oldest history in American conservation. To start, they kind of talked about the Indians, not too much, a little bit, because the Indians, they kind of were the first environmentalists of the of America. But then Europeans came in and kind of wiped out all of that, all of the ideas that they had and the environmentalist, just ways, practices that the Indians had been practicing for thousands of years. So the book pretty much kind of starts with when the Europeans arrived and started messing everything up, and then the path that kind of goes away from, trying to not mess stuff up so much. So this section went, over some of the oldest history of American conservation. They talk about the pioneers, the frontiersmen, all the wastefulness of the environment that went on at that time. It goes over all that stuff. And then part 2 of the book was called The Progressive Conservation Crusade. This was kind of a duller part of the book. It talked a lot about politics, presidents, governors. Gifford, Pickno, and McGee made quite a few appearances in this section. It basically kind of went over the birth of the term conservation. Part 3 was conserving resources and environmental quality. This section was a little more interesting than the previous one. It talked about soil, the CCC, which I've always been really interested in what they do, or what they did, I guess. Talks about the change from the term conservation to environmentalism. Talks about land ethics, preserving wilderness, beautification, all that kind of stuff. And then part 4 of the book is called The Gospel of Ecology. So this is a larger section of the book, had a lot of chapters going over kind of the stuff that we've all been learning about, not only in this class, but stuff that's been kind of drilled into us since elementary school, like pollution and pesticides, overpopulation, just kind of the state of the environment, environmental crisis in general, all that kind of stuff. So this was a larger section of the book, a lot more chapters. And then we have the last section of the book, part 5, is called The New Environmentalism. This is more geared towards modern times, though this book, like I said, was first written in 1968, and even this, the most recent edition that I know of, is still 30 years ago at this point. And I mean, we've made tremendous strides in environmentalism in the last 30 years, so it was modern for Nash at the time and not modern for us now. I believe the intended audience of this book, I would think it would be meant for students, environmentalists, scholars, anyone in that sort of book. Though this book isn't as dry as a lot of the books that are meant for those types of audiences. It just has so much information from so many different sources that I really can't see this book as being intended as something that someone would want to read just for fun in their free time. So did the author, I would say that the author didn't change my mind on environmentalism or cause me to abandon any former ideas that I had. The book was kind of what I had expected it to be, with the exception of the chapters not really being written by Nash himself, but by other people. But for the most part, it was what I expected. It was information. A lot of it I had already had some general knowledge on, as do most of us that are going to school for degrees involving the environment. But also, in the last 6 years, I've learned a lot about the history of the country, just from traveling around I've done a lot of traveling to national parks, national forests, preserves, wherever else, and in all those places they have so much information available all over the place, whether at a visitor center, in a brochure, or even like a scenic overlook. You stop and there's this whole plaque on the history of that specific area, as far as the environment goes. So I like to stop and read those a lot. So There are a lot of times about how the land was treated in the past of that area, how they're being environmentally friendly now. That kind of stuff has just always really interested me. So, whenever I come across that kind of information, I stop to take it in. From this book, though, I did learn a lot that I didn't know before, mostly in the form of details that are underneath the broad scope of, the more commonly known facts about environmentalism. Like, for example, it's no secret that Americans treated nature like garbage in the past. And now I just know more details past, oh, they logged everything and, threw garbage in the water. Now I know more details about all that kind of stuff. And would I recommend this book to others? I would recommend this book to someone that has to do an assignment or a book report similar to what we are doing. It's good information. It's stuff that's great to know, but realistically, nobody's gonna read this book in their free time for fun, unless unless they're very into environmentalism or very into historical biographies. It's like I said before, the book is interesting. It's not as dry as it could have been, but it's so packed with information from so many different sources, and some of those sources are from the 1800s with the dialect that's very difficult and dry to just read. Yeah, it's not something that I really enjoyed reading, but I think it was a good pick for this class because it kind of brought together a lot of the things that we've kind of talked about, but in more of like a historical sense. So, yep, this concludes my book review of American Environmentalism: Readings in Conservation History by Roderick, Frazier, Nash.